What's up, world? I'm Matt Newberg from Hungary, and this is The Feed. Each episode, we'll dive into conversations with the industry insiders who are leveraging technology to shape the way we eat. On today's episode of The Feed, I sat down with Jensen Cummings, a fifth-generation chef and restaurateur turned consultant and media operator. In this episode, we'll talk about where Jensen sees the biggest growth opportunities for restaurants, the tug-of-war between restaurateurs and tech companies, and the lens operators should use to evaluate new innovations like automation. Jensen, well, it's awesome to have you on the podcast finally. Thanks so much for taking the time. I'd love for you to talk about your background, working in restaurants, starting as a chef, running your own restaurants, and now running this media empire that you have and helping restaurateurs through your consulting.
Sure, yeah. I always think about my story starting long before I was even born. I'm the fifth consecutive generation of chef, restaurateur in my family. We opened our first restaurant in 1900 in Little Falls, Minnesota, called La Fond House. That was our French family, Parisian family. Even further back in Paris, there's some lineage of the culinary side. For any of the chefs out there, fond, right, is the sauce that you make from deglazing the pan drippings and you build a fond. So even the family name has that culinary connotation. And then we had quite a few Acadians that went down to Louisiana and to Lafayette. And those were, those early Cajuns. So there was a little bit of culinary background there. And then even the Irish side of our family moved all the way to California, and they had multiple generations. So it's in my DNA. It's in my blood. We're gluttons for punishment. That was great-great-grandparents. Then great-grandparents and grandparents were in San Francisco, had restaurants and bars. And then even currently, my dad's three younger brothers all own restaurants in multiple different states. My younger brother is a chef, specializes in sushi. So it's in us 100%. And my family, though, specifically my dad, my mom is an amazing cook. My dad can't boil an egg. So we're like, how are your brothers and your sons really talented in this space? And you're just completely the outlier there. So it wasn't like I was growing up in a restaurant, right? We would visit our families and go to the restaurants and sit at the corner stool on the end of the bar type scenario. But I wasn't coming home from school and picking cilantro at the corner table, that kind of scenario. So it wasn't until I graduated high school, it was a total fuck up. I was like, what am I going to do now? And one of my uncles said, come out to Ames, Iowa. So going from San Diego to Ames, Iowa, major culture shock for me, for sure. For sure. He said, just come wash dishes for a summer, hang out. I was like, cool, I'll go, hit on college girls and party in a, Iowa State college town. And so hit it there, and I was in, like, from the first day where there was dishes stacked as tall as I am. I'm 6'2", so that's a tall stack of dishes. I just loved the energy, the chaos. I love the creativity, and ended up living with 3 and 4 different guys that worked in the kitchens. So it just really kind of sunk in that there's a reason that my family's so drawn to this. Did the culinary school thing, graduated from culinary school out there, great program there in Des Moines, and that kind of put me on the path,
Amazing. And then talk to us about how you got into media here and consulting, and how you're incredibly prolific. I can't even count how many podcasts you have.
I can't either. There's a list somewhere. I can't keep track of it,
Yeah. A lot of touch points, a lot of content. I'm not going to ask you for your content secrets, but I guess what was the role of creating all of this? Like, how'd you get into it, and like, how has it paid off for you?
Yeah, well, TBD on how it's paying off. That's an emotional and financial and attention roller coaster. We can get into that, and I'd love to share any tips for sure with the audience, because I think especially a restaurant audience or a tech audience needs to interact more when it comes to media and content. But the way that it went was I was very much on that chef-driven path, right? I worked for a lot of the James Beard award-winning type restaurants. Like, I wanted to be on that path. Was executive chef by 25, owned a restaurant before I was 30. Wow. Was in all the media, was on TV and radio and social media and magazines, all that kind of stuff. And we can talk about the success and vulnerabilities of that as maybe we dig in a little bit more. That was the path I was on. And I went on that really steep trajectory, like I think a lot of people in the industry go, where I was hot shit and it went to my head and I didn't understand how to go from being one of the outcasts, one of the, misfits, and then trying to all of a sudden we were the cool kids, right? And this Food Network effect from 2000 when I started in my career up until even still today, it's still a little bit pervasive. And so we went from being the outcasts where we did cool shit, but it was behind the scenes. Like a lot of people didn't understand or know, and we were still kind of the help, right? And then all of a sudden we became cool, and I did not know how to handle that. This adolescence, as you were actually in your adolescence, and the industry didn't have a lot of ways to teach us how to be good stewards of this industry. And so I thought getting plates thrown at my head was a badge of honor. Turns out it was stupid and toxic, and we perpetuated that. And we thought, like, well, if we're more like the Gordon Ramsays, then that's going to mean success to us. And so that was a big vulnerability because we were immature. I was immature in understanding the responsibility. And the challenge we have now, and a lot of the media stuff we'll talk about, is we went from being the misfits to being the cool kids to all of a sudden now we're the establishment. And we don't like that because we got into this industry because we didn't want the 9 to 5. We didn't want the cubicle. I didn't want the suit and tie. I wanted something different. And now we're the establishment where quote unquote kids these days are saying restaurants are not a great place to work. Why the hell would I come work at a restaurant? So that's a big vulnerability we're dealing with. And that was the catalyst. I was on this steep trajectory. I completely burned out, couldn't do it anymore. Being the chef owner, all of that, I just couldn't do it. And there was a day, I remember the exact day, Matt, I did a big event and myself and other chefs, and everyone's patting us on the back. You're amazing. Your food's so great, right? All of this ego getting fed, right? We're drinking way too much. Everyone's buying us shots. All of those things that are just so cliche, right? But I was exactly that cliche. And then I drive home and I get pulled over and I have a roadside DUI check. And somehow, luckily, I pass. And the police officer was like, look, I know that you know that I know. Get home safe, right? It could have gone very differently. I get home, I walk in the back door, and there's a pregnancy test there on the counter, and we're going to have our first kid.
Wow.
And in that moment, every emotion that I could feel as a chef, as a restaurateur, as an operator, owner, was flooding through me. I had all of the accolades, and then I had the deep reality of, you're a fuck up right now, man. You're about to go to jail because you've been drinking and you're driving home now. And then now you're going to be a father. And I said, that day, I said, something has to change. And I didn't know what that was, but it ended up being kind of this consulting strategy. I'd done a little bit of that, kind of consulted on menus. I was really afraid of that, Matt, because when you get on that path, sometimes as a chef, you become completely irrelevant. Like, oh, you're just a consultant now. You're not a real chef. And it's something for sure I grappled with for a long time. And in doing that, I just like to share everything. I'm an over communicator. And basically the over communication came about where, well, I can communicate all this stuff on social media. And it was around that time where, there was Instagram was starving for attention, basically, and content. So I was putting a lot of content out there, really crappy content, horrible images, no idea how to do video. I think when beta of Facebook Live first came out, I think that was like summer, June of 2015, maybe something like that. I think I was doing lives a month in, a couple weeks in of that launching, because I was traveling the country doing these beer and food guest chef dinners. And I was like, let's just go live and show people what's happening. I always like to show people the underbelly. And that was really where it started, getting into the media side.
Amazing. Love to hear how you cut your teeth in restaurants and then kind of took on this other role. Really cool. So when it comes to this consulting work, you're helping restaurants either with like some sort of problem that they're trying to fix specifically, or you're helping them with, from what I understand, like going from 0 to 1, creating a whole new concept. That's correct, right?
It was 0 to 1. Good book. Link that book up.
But you're helping them essentially come up with a brand new concept from scratch, right? And so I guess my question is like, what is the role of tech, and And what is your kind of mantra and what is your like approach to incorporating that tech for kind of both of those types of customers, the customers that are basically incubating something new and the customer that is already operating, something's not working?
Yeah, my number one mantra is definitely like break the industry standards. All of the industry standards that we were taught or not taught and just told copy and paste this P&L, copy and paste this business plan, they don't work. They're not built for the success by and large for the majority of businesses. So we built a fairly bad business model. And I for sure was susceptible to that. I hit all those target numbers. I hit all those prime costs and food costs and labor costs and pour costs, right? And occupancy costs, all of those things, and still just so much vulnerability in the business model. So I was very aware of that, and having failed at being the restaurant owner multiple times, it's like I have to do something different. I can't just keep perpetuating the same business model and having people pay me money to set them up to fail, right? And so that was a big foundational piece for me, is like understanding how we actually change the business model. And so in that like disruption mindset, it's really important to tackle everything. Nothing can be dogma. And too many things in our industry were dogmatic. We just said, this is the way that it is. It's always been done like this. This is how we do things, right? And that's again a huge vulnerability of what we kind of perpetuate in the industry. So I want to go at all of that. And it's one of the reasons that technology is really, really problematic in the sense of a lot is lost in adoption because it's happening to us rather than with us or from within us, right? And we're Luddites. We want to create things with our hands. As a chef for so long, and now somebody who's in media, or Matt, somebody called me last year, I think was the first time somebody called me a journalist. I was like, fuck you. I'm not a journalist. What are you talking about? I'm a chef. I was like, wait a minute, right? And so... So there's a little bit of that goes into it. It's so personal too, Matt. Like if you're to tell somebody that their restaurant sucks, their food sucks, it's like telling them their child is ugly.
Exactly.
So it's really emotionally tied. And you know that. You've seen that as somebody who has perspective coming from in and out of this industry, right? You have a little bit of a bird's eye view, especially from your tech background, to see why are restaurants doing this? This obviously makes no sense. And then they'll tell you, well, that's how I was trained. That's how I was brought up. So that was foundational for me. So when I started rolling out new models, it was basically break everything, tear down the facade and break everything and then build it and then break it and then build it. So I've gone back to like stripping down a restaurant operating budget, completely restructuring a restaurant operating budget, to take groupings of line items that made no sense to me of where they were and how we allocated funds and the percentage that was tied to it. For example, now we've moved everything that directly affects direct labor, one of our biggest costs, and the attrition of lost labor is a significant cost. And then, we're short-staffed. Kids don't want to work these days, all of those things. So we've shifted that. We have a section called the employee investment. And it's all of the things, wages, benefits, culture, education, the way you're paying taxes within how you're paying your people and the things that you're offering. So you can look at it in one snapshot, just an example of the way we're thinking about that. The way that we drive top line revenue and thinking about retention and the impact that has. So that's how we're building the business model. Then a big thing that I'm doing now that I hadn't done before is like, this is great. Your concept sounds interesting. Let's work on it. Let's build it together. And we get downstream and then realize there's just a lot of fallacies in the approach. There wasn't alignment in what I was thinking we were trying to build, what they were thinking they were trying to build. And so now I take people through a process, either pre-opening assessments, or if they're existing businesses, we do help some existing businesses with operating kind of audits, basically. Because I think we underestimate the 140 different entities and technology companies that you're going to have to interact with that are going to have to be an operational and a financial line item for you to be able to have success in your business. And we think about food, beverage, and service and say, here, I have an interesting business model. Oh, I'm doing quick casual versus full service. But that is in the clouds. And there's so many things in the dirt that we need to really work on. So I take people back and I take them through a process that can be slightly uncomfortable. And actually, Matt, my goal with most people who are on the pre-opening side is to convince them not to open a restaurant. And I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of these. And probably about 70 to 80% of businesses after they go through go, fuck that, I'm out. Like either they go, I'm out completely, or they say, okay, I'm doing a completely different model than I originally had anticipated. And the time and cost that saves them and heartache that saves them versus raising $250, $500, $1 million, you know, putting themselves upside down to be able to then have their dream restaurant. Oh, it's heartbreaking, 100% heartbreaking. So that's kind of the foundational stuff. And you let me know where you want to go, because there's some specific ways of developing and building in technology and preferred vendors. And it's a lot of if-then scenarios, right? So it's almost a lot of algorithm building, right? If this, then this, if this. So there's so many more choices than people ever imagined. And there's a lot of analysis paralysis that now goes with that if we're not copying and pasting the same broken business model.
No, I love it. There's definitely a lot of value in trying to convince somebody why they shouldn't start a restaurant, and whatever is born out of that is going to be better. But you touched on something that was really interesting, which is this idea that that there's a lot of unchallenged or just generally adopted practices that haven't really been considered, and technology amplifying this problem, right? Technology, you just install the thing and it starts working in a certain way, and assuming your business running a certain way, and then you start to morph your operations towards this. One example of this I see every day is just like something you talk about a lot, which is tipping, right? People don't think about the role of tipping, what kind of establishment you are, how those tips are being pooled, how that's being communicated to the customer. I went out to dinner this week to an expensive Italian red sauce joint. I love red sauce, as many people know. And there was a 2% surcharge for the back of house. I'm totally for that, right? But don't default the tip to 20% on top of that. Don't default, don't just use the standard Toast lazy UX. Customize that to account for the back of house, so that the waiter isn't making more money than isn't profiting off of the fact that you're trying to help the people on the line. It's absolutely insane. So my question for you is, how much is technology currently, from your vantage point, changing the restaurant industry for better or for worse by people just simply adopting it and not even thinking about what they're doing, and that the change is happening to them, not coming from within?
A restaurant will never be the same as it ever was again. And there's a lot of factors that have all come to pass over the last few years. And this was already happening. And I think this has now become kind of a cliche of the pandemic accelerated everything. It did. It accelerated everything. It was all already happening. So restaurants will never be the same. So what you thought a restaurant was if you work in a restaurant, what you thought a restaurant was when you've been a patron of restaurants, that expectation is shifting and needs to shift. And where we're holding on to the restaurant of the past is where there's going to be the most friction. So that's kind of the underlying friction that's happening there, right? That's the underlying stressors that are going to cause the need for innovation, and then they're going to cause a lot of fallout. And so they're going to also affect the relationships internally within the business, with the business and their patrons, with their community, with governments, with technology companies. So that's the undertone that we have to think about this from. So every time I think about a new technology, a new vendor, a new business model, a new approach, I'm thinking about, does that feed into the restaurant of the future, or is it holding on to the restaurant of the past? Now, that doesn't mean that every single component and element within the restaurant changes. Everything needs to be challenged. You have to ask the questions of who, what, why, when, where, and how. But that doesn't mean that every single thing needs to change, right? Sometimes micro changes make a big impact. I remember my mom told this. She was from the generation where they saw the moon landing live, right? And she told me this quite a bit when I was a kid, that she remembered learning that you get to the moon by tens of thousands of adjustments of 0.000000001%. And sometimes we do think, and myself included, think it has to be a 180. And the reality is you don't get to the moon like that. And so the micro adjustments are really important. And so trajectory and self-awareness are really important in that process. So that's the foundation that I think about this from. That's the lens that I look through. I'm at this point right now where I am saying that every technology should be evaluated. Every single technology should be considered. Who's considering that, at what point, to what degree, and what the cost of that is a major challenge. But everything needs to be considered, because we have to move the needle so far from where we are as Luddites, as people who do not want technology. We do it only obligatorily, right? With major dissent. So much is lost in the adoption phase in anything new, and especially from technology to restaurants. That loss is massive through the adoption process, right? And the cost is massive on both sides as well. So I think about that. At some point, and that's coming pretty soon, where there's a tipping point where we're going to have to really evaluate the companies themselves and their intent and their agendas. You come across a lot of companies. I've interacted with thousands now of technology companies where the technology might be sound and interesting, but the company itself, to me, has some red flags, or vice versa. There might be some technologies that have red flags, and the company itself, might be interesting. So I'm trying to weed through that. But if we're only adopting technology that is ready for the solutions that we need, we're going to not be able to move as quickly as we need to. So you have to be able to take some risks. You have to be able to make some mistakes to adopt certain technologies that you realize in 6 months, 9 months, 2 years weren't exactly the right thing. But you need a feedback loop to be able to understand, is this hurting or helping our business? Not the romanticized version of what we think our business is, but the reality of our business. And then be able to take quick action with that. And so it's kind of the hire slow, fire fast approach. I think there's a little bit of that. And then at a certain point, we're going to have to take a step back within probably the next couple of years and say, okay, by and large, what does the tech stack really need to look like to be able to create a strong and sound industry? The challenge is, I don't know that restaurants right now have a good feedback loop within their own systems, let alone to be able to evaluate systems that are being somewhat thrust upon them, be them helpful or hurtful as it is. So that's kind of the lens that I'm looking through right now.
Yeah, I really like that iterative approach, and I think that's really sound advice from what I'm hearing from you, which is that operators need to figure out how to create an environment where they can quickly test and iterate on these different technologies, because there's not going to be a podcast or a book or any like you or me that can be able to say that this is going to 100% work for your business, right? There's so many variables, and until we turn it on and do a test. Yeah,
my advice is going to be wrong more than it's right.
Right.
And I'm okay with that. Like, I think it's important, again, to have this sound feedback loop.
Yeah.
So most of the time when I build these concepts with clients on the consulting side, I'm very, very thoughtful around making sure that they understand how to build on top of it. You have to be able to evolve it. And so when people are thinking about their concept, you have to understand the things that are core, that are immovable, that are non-negotiable, and the things that are going to need to get tweaked, and the things that are just happenstance to doing business. So I think of things being required, recommended, and rad is like a way that we think about a lot of things. So what are things that are required? These are things that you have to do to operate this business, right? These are the things that I recommend because it makes a lot of sense for the type of business you're trying to build, the type of person that you are. That's really important. A lot of my process of evaluating concepts is really about evaluating and understanding the people, right? So a great person who's teachable, listens, is adaptable, is going to do a lot better than somebody who's not, even if somebody who's not has a much better concept. I'd take the inferior concept with the superior approach than vice versa.
Totally.
And so you have to be able to evolve. So I call it the sandbox, right? You got to build this framework for the sandbox, but within that sandbox, you can cultivate innovation and creativity. You want to make a moat, you want to build sand castles, you want to make snow angels, sand angels. That's amazing. That works within this model. You'll be able to shift that around, right? Or that Buddhist approach where they do the beautiful sand art. When it's done, they destroy it, right? Because nothing is permanent. So I think about it like that. But that's really hard when we have a mentality and we're training this industry. You're only as good as your next plate up. So you're only as good as the commoditized version of what you're putting out, not the food and the beverage being an extension of the experiential side and the relationship side of the businesses, which to me is much more important.
Wow. So we have so much surface area when it comes to restaurants operations, right? There's the front of house, there's the back of house, your digital presence. You have all your payroll, accounting, your staffing. You talk to so many companies, you read a lot of articles, you're consulting a lot of restaurants, you're entrenched in this industry. So
deeply.
If you had to look at the entire surface area, right, which is very large, where do you think is the biggest opportunity right now for technology to play a role? If you were thinking about, what to prioritize as a restaurateur, and you only had so much resources, where would you invest to get the biggest bang for your buck?
I'll break it down into two ways, but the one word that's absolutely the necessity is communication. Restaurants, we're not that good at communication, which is a total paradox because our whole platform is communicating things through food and beverage, to speaking with guests, to having that interaction, that banter. So much of it, though, becomes very canned, right? And these canned questions get canned answers. How is everything? Everything is fine. And so we go very quick into the routine of like, how do we systemize a 2-minute pickup, a 10-minute ticket time, a 15-minute, touch point, a 45-minute table turn, 30 seconds to touch a guest. That all of these things that we do to kind of control and manipulate time and communication, unfortunately, creates a lot of lack of communication. And then the lack of communication, I think, breaks down two ways. So the first need and biggest need is communication within teams. Right? We have done such a shit job of communicating with teams. And I've been guilty of this because we were trained and it was beaten into us. It's all about the guest experience. Customer is always right. All of these things. And we left all of the hospitality on the field. And there was no self-hospitality left. And so that has created all the vulnerabilities of high substance abuse rates, which I struggled with, mental health issues I struggled with, right? The high rate of attrition and turnover, the fact that nobody wants to work in restaurants right now. Those are a lack of communication. And there's lots of infrastructure. We didn't pay enough. The wages, benefits, culture, and education feed into that. But at its core, it's communication. And part of the thing is there's not that feedback loop for us to know until it's broken that we weren't doing a good job of communicating. We thought we were. And so that communication piece is big. So when you have companies working in that space, you have the 7 Shifts and Homebase and Harry and Expandshare and these different companies that are trying to create solutions for communication flow and infrastructure around that communication. That to me is really important and valuable. And that's why you see companies like 7 Shifts. Jordan has been on Restaurant Idea Factory as a guest correspondent in a series called Emphasizing Teams, right? And Danny Meyer just invested in them, and so it makes a lot of sense. Plus, they're Canadian, which I love Canadian companies. Shout out to all the Canadian tech companies. You rule. I love the Canadian companies. Sometimes step it up, U.S. companies. Far better than the Silicon Valley tech companies. I like the Canadian tech companies much better. So I think there's opportunity and need there. And then communication with guests. So when people think about communication with the guests, the first place they go, and this is important, is the marketing side. How are we getting more butts in seats, right? Like, what does that look like for restaurants? To me, it's going to be the communication that you mentioned. Things like surcharges and tipping don't turn into fucking Frontier Airlines where it's charge after charge after charge after charge, and you're trying to bury fee after fee so they don't get the sticker shock of the 22% auto grat that you're throwing on there. So it's a big problem if our communication and transparency isn't there. Nobody knows where and how that money is being spent. And then they look and they see all of these people talking about the restaurants are not a great place to work and how toxic the culture is and how bad potentially the practices are around pay and benefits and all those things. They're saying, wait a minute, where is my 2% of the back of house actually going? And so you're creating doubt in the consumer. And if there's doubt and a lack of transparency and communication, what do? We come up with the worst possible scenarios. We always make up the worst possible scenarios if we're not given clarity. So I think that's where technology that clearly communicates to the guest the expectation of the experience financially and experientially, food, beverage, all of it, I think is going to be critical. Everything. It's the whole game we're playing right now.
Great stuff. Hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it seems so obvious, but it's so foundational that without this communication on both ends of this of the customer and the back of house and staff and the front of house staff, but these two different.
We're building a lot of castles on top of clay pots right now, Matt.
Interesting.
That's what's happening. Like we're not creating foundational communication because first party data sounds sexier than talking about in-house communication. Right? VCs are spending a lot more money on those valuations, right? They're getting much better, pref than common stock in the company who goes public because they're looking to do things that invest in people versus the things that invest in big, shiny tech things. And then the restaurant industry struggles with that because we don't know how to give Silicon Valley, and I know that's unfair to just categorize everyone in tech as Silicon Valley, but we don't know how to give Silicon Valley good actionable feedback. So a lot of the feedback that's coming, even through organizations like the National Restaurant Association or Technomics and stuff, are put through a very different filter than the reality of what's happening within the restaurants.
Of course.
Right? And so that's a big part of my job, and your job too, Matt, is to be a translator for people who think they're speaking the same languages. Most of what I do is try to understand the languages that other entities that feed in the whole ecosystem of restaurants are speaking. So like going back to when we reorganized, and I say we because my partner Andrew Parr did most of the heavy lifting of moving boxes around because I'm an idiot. I'm just good at asking stupid questions to smart people. So when we rebuilt that, I looked at every single line item and I was like, I have to have a deep and meaningful and also challenging conversation with every entity who might exist in that space. Because I need to understand regulators. I need to understand sewage and oil removal and third-party order aggregators and linen companies. Like, why do you exist? What the hell is it that you do? What are you trying to solve? Do you play nice with these people, or are these people competitors of yours? How do I build something where everybody is speaking the same language? Because everybody is so siloed. Their solution is the solution, right? And they're telling you, you can't exist without this. The reality is you can't exist without 146 different, 122 different, 212 different entities that feed the need that your business has. So that's a big thing. We're not able to give a feedback loop because we're not good at having those conversations. And we don't have time and bandwidth, and even the vernacular to be able to speak those languages. So that's why what we do is important now, Matt, because we're trying to sift through that to translate it. What I call cool uncle. My approach is the cool uncle approach. Your parents tell you to eat your vegetables, your doctors, your teachers, worst idea ever. Your cool uncle tells you, best idea ever. So if that means I need to make fun of myself, tell on myself, make fun of the industry, break down real life scenarios that people have probably lived through, challenge tech companies, try and translate for tech companies, then I'm going to spend a lot of time and effort doing that. Hence, why I had to become so prolific at content. Why I had to figure out, my team had to figure out how we can put out 1,200 pieces of content in a single month. Like that is a massive, right? I see you getting anxiety just thinking about that.
I'm getting 12.
Yeah, dude. 1,200 pieces of content. Even right now, what am I putting out? a dozen original pieces of content a week across 70 something distribution points is what the average right now of content is. And it's not near enough. It's not near enough for the needs and challenges and hopes and pains and desires that the industry has. I'm willing to put in that work, that effort, that time.
Really admire that. So we look at this. You're touching on this wound, which is this inherent tension between restaurants and tech companies, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said, it's like going to the NRA, and National Restaurant Association, for those who don't know.
The other NRA.
The NRA. And seeing 2,000 vendors trying to sell you stuff, or going to like one of these, any of these conferences where it's just like you want to pull your hair out because you're just like, how much time do I have to understand each of these? And is it going to be death by 212 paper cuts, essentially?
Right.
But there's this tension. So my question for you is like, what do both sides need to do, or what do I guess tech companies need to learn to create these win-win scenarios? And then how do we ensure as an industry that that the tech companies don't just become these giant behemoths that kind of undermine or aggregate the restaurant industry and suck all the value out of it, the same way we saw that happen with the hotel industry, right? What you saw in the hotel industry was that Priceline, Expedia, all the aggregators were worth more than like the largest hotel chains, right?
Than a lot of the hotel chains combined.
Exactly.
Right. It's almost The Big Short. It was like there's 100 times as much money in the potential for people to go to a hotel than there is in the hotels.
Yeah.
And restaurants, here's the thing, Matt, it will happen to restaurants. Like, it will happen. This is our nature. We're going to do this, and then we're going to have to rebuild again. So what's going to happen is, instead of it being generational, everything is accelerated now, where you're going to have to go through the boom of restaurants from the Food Network effect of 2000 until currently still going. Well, let's taper it off, but let's just say from 2000 to 2015. Let's just say that. For 15 years, there was just steep trajectory, tons of attention, tons of money. We made amazing strides too. I'm not just Debbie Downer over here. I'm amazingly grateful for the opportunities it created for me, amazingly grateful for the relationships that I was able to cultivate through that time. Even when I look back at some of my worst moments, I have some of the best memories and best relationships. So it's really hard for us to separate those things. So what do? We just conflate them and say, well, those were the best of times, And now we have to go through this downturn where we have an identity crisis right now, and we're having to evaluate identity crisis and a business model crisis. And instead of it being up to the next generation to fix the next problem, it's still going to be within the generation of Gen X and millennials into elder Gen Zs to now grapple with the problem of, we have become such a behemoth and such a monolith that now how do we pull out and innovate down and wide, because there's no more up. And that's going to happen to this industry. And it's going to happen very quickly, right? Hotels didn't deal with all of those. Like, that happened much more slowly because the technologies kind of attacked them first. And restaurants now were so resistant to technology for so long that instead of Uber and Uber Eats starting with restaurants, they started with taxis. And instead of the Expedias and things starting with restaurants, they start with hotels. And all these technologies started with different industries. And now all of them are dogpiling on the restaurant industry. So we will deal with the fallout of that. The reality for the relationship, it's back to communication. The communication between tech companies and restaurants is dog shit. It is so bad. They speak completely different languages. There is this need for technobabble to prove the validity and the value of what you're creating as a tech company. And then restaurants don't have the understanding of how to ask critical questions to evaluate the need and the value of what that could potentially bring to their business, and the shortcomings and the potential loss through, again, adoption. So I think that's a big piece of it. I think about this for me personally, and this is what's going to happen with a lot of technology, especially as I mentioned, where I'm saying evaluate and potentially adopt everything. and then start to be able to make really critical decisions really quickly. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right? That Christopher Nolan quote. And I think about that a lot because I had to reflect the fact that I was the villain of the story in multiple chapters. And I still like struggle with that. There's still this deep seated like trauma of being the chef that I know a lot of people in our industry still are grappling with as they try to be better stewards of this industry. And the tech companies, that's part of the problem. I don't know how you stay an amazing, innovative, people first, solution first, tech founder, CEO, as you all of a sudden go into 30 million in sales, 50 million, 150 million, $1 billion valuation. I just don't know how you do that because we've seen time and time again, tech companies haven't been able to do that. Right? Not many companies at large have been able to do that. Very few companies are the Patagonias of the world that somehow at massive mainstream adoption and valuations and penetration internationally have somehow found a way to stay relevant and stay good stewards of their segment, their industry, whatever that might be. So that's a very non-answer for you there, Matt. I do not know how the hell we do that, but it has to come down to communication and it has to come down to accountability on the side of technology for sure, and accountability on the side of restaurants.
Amen. So,
preach.
One of the things that you talk about a lot on your shows and your various touch points, social media, is automation and this also this tension, going a little bit deeper, of like automation versus like hospitality. And so we're seeing like everything from, server robots to kind of back of house prep, French fry salad with this new Sweet Green Kitchen and Chipotle getting into, chips and salads. Flippy. All these different technologies, right? And it's all getting commoditized. And so it's only going to become cheaper and easier to adopt from my vantage point. So my question for you is, what's the right framework that restaurateurs need to be thinking about to ensure that this creates a better, not only like a better operational approach, but also, more importantly, like that you don't degrade the sacred customer experience that everybody is seeking out your business to indulge in?
Mm-hmm. No easy answers here. When I think about this problem and opportunity, I really go to this place of what is hospitality and when, where, and how are we giving that hospitality? And so there's a lot of steps of process operationally that we talk about that we conflate with hospitality. And so that's not hospitality. The reality is a restaurant only offers two things, right? It offers the convenience and sustenance of just having food and having food quickly. And if you're playing that game, that's a race to the bottom, right? Because that is already commoditized and it will continue to commoditize rapidly at
Ghost
scale.
kitchens are going to do that.
All models are going to do that. If you are playing the convenience and the sustenance game, that food goes here and it's just food, that people are counting dollars and cents and calories, you're very, very vulnerable. The second thing that people offer is a memory, right? The experience. And we spend a lot of time, effort, and money for experiences, for memories, right? These are the things that we significantly value in our culture. And I think about this when I think about, you see some of the numbers and studies around how much America spends as a percentage of income on food, and it's one of the lowest of industrialized nations. And there's a lot that feeds into it. Culturally, we don't value food. That's one. And then there's things like the Farm Bill and stuff that are subsidizing and driving commodities in that way. But that's the situation we're in. We don't value food. For whatever reasons, we as a culture in America do not value food. We don't spend money on it, right? What we do spend money on is experience. and entertainment, right? We spend more on the way things make us think and the way things make us feel than any culture in history. And so I really want restaurants thinking about that, because that's where the opportunity is. So again, foundational, that's the lens. If you're looking through that, make decisions from that point. The experience also has to be for internal guests. Again, your team needs to have a great experience just like your guest. And my wife, Betsy, she worked for Marriott for a long time, and they had a quote that I remember and like, where it's take care of your associates take care of the guests will come back, right?
Yeah,
and I think
the flywheel.
Branson and other people have something like that. That it's simple and it makes sense to me, right? You start the relationship internally, and then it's exponential once it goes externally.
Right.
So that, I think, is where we need to be looking through that lens. So there's lots of tasks within the restaurant that I believe can and should be automated. And restaurants have been automating for a long, long time. This is just a different tone and texture of it. We've been automating for a long, long time. We used to whisk everything by hand. Now we have blenders, and now we have RoboCoops, right? We've been automating in a lot of different ways. We've used utensils to do that needed a certain amount of manipulation. What's scary now is how little manipulation or how much autonomy potentially these have. Right? So that, I think, is the scary part about it. What I'm hoping is that we're able to invest way, way more in the experiential side, in the hospitality side, in the memory side, internally and externally, because we are investing in things that take away a lot of the remedial tasks and things like that. The two problems that I see right now being the biggest problems that have all kinds of downstream effect. Number one, we're making these decisions from a place of desperation. And we don't make very many good decisions from a place of desperation. Ever. Historically, as humans, we just don't make good decisions. So a lot of people are freaking out right now because restaurants are not a great place to work. People don't want to work at your restaurant. And we're freaking out and saying, well, how do we solve all these labor issues? Well, again, I think we have culture issues. We need to invest in those things and fix that problem, because a robot is not going to fix that problem. And so if you're only thinking operationally, you're vulnerable. If you're thinking experientially and you think about how those things are sound investments in your team, in the infrastructure that you're building, in the relationships that you have internally and externally, then I think that's where the real opportunity is within this. But if we're only thinking about that operationally, it's a big problem for us. And then the second way that I think there's a pretty big vulnerability is the fact that we are undervaluing the price of the experience. And so when we're thinking about robots or technology and things like that, we're putting a cap on how much people are willing to spend on the food. So we're trying to use the robots to create another way for people to value what you're doing. And I think that is transactional. Like the infinite kitchen that you mentioned. People are going to go that, wow, it looks cool. There's all these this wall with these vertical, cool, colorful things that have all the ingredients, and this bowl moves through this thing. And they spent a lot of time, money, and effort making that a focal piece. But that's not hospitality. So the allure of that will lose momentum. The robot having cute Hello Kitty eyes and an adorable voice is amazing for marketing today. Leverage it 100%. Do not think that now has created a different level of hospitality. It has not. So those are the two things, I think, internally and then externally, that we're potentially overvaluing the automation or the robotics or AI or any of those things. And we have to find out when a touch point makes sense for a robot and when it does not. So one of the things with automation we were talking about a lot is automated responses, right? ChatGPT type stuff. And I've been thinking about that a lot. We just had one on the show. We were talking about Dave's Hot Chicken got a long response from somebody, a review from somebody, was kind of, talking shit a little bit and saying, Dave's Hot Chicken isn't as good as Prince's or Bolton's or Hattie B's, right? Nashville hot chicken legends.
Not
and
apples,
who would
apples.
be, right? But saying, Dave's Chicken is good enough. And I think gave him 4 stars and all that. And then there was an automated response. And I'm like, okay, the automated response is something like that. But I'm like, does it make sense? Because then at least you're responding quickly. Maybe. Does it feel like, wow, this person spent a lot of time and effort and a lot of words to give you a thoughtful response and gave you 4 stars, and you're still giving them an automated response? So there's going to need to be different ways that trigger certain actions. So like one of the things I was thinking about with that was, what if word count made a difference? What if a review is less than 60 words? It's an automated response. Right, because that person was just saying, yeah, the food was fine. I liked it. It was 3 stars.
Right.
And if somebody does more than 60, it's a human response because of the fact that somebody's put the time and effort into. So that's just like a little microcosm of the way I'm thinking about some of the automation.
Totally. There needs to be that, again, going back to the feedback loop. The tech companies productize these switches. It's on or off.
That's right.
We turn it on. The long spill your guts review is going to get treated the same way as the Twitter 140 prior limit review, right? So all these nuances need to be figured out, and the only way we can get to the nuance is to have the partnership between these two entities, the restaurants and the tech companies.
Yeah, Avi Gorin, the CEO of Marquee, who we work with a lot too, they've been talking about AI and HI, and I was like, I just like the fact that they have human intelligence. They're trying, they're trying, and I don't know if everybody's always going to be able to accomplish it, but the fact that we're putting time, effort, resources, culture behind trying to understand where the synergy is potentially between artificial intelligence and human intelligence, I think is very critical. If we're not doing that, that's problematic, and there's plenty of companies that are not doing that. They're just trying to push AI as hard and fast as they possibly can. And there's some companies that are going to realize that they needed to, and they're too far downstream. And some companies are going to go, okay, we did that for a while, it was cute and everything, but the real money is in pushing the AI side, and they're going to lose that part of themselves again, becoming the villain, because they let go of something that I think needs to be core and fundamental to the way that you approach your business, is thinking about that human intelligence side.
Love it. It's all about the balance. Jensen, this has been pure gold. Everything that you've been dropping lately on this hour that we've been spending together. As we come towards the end, I would just love for you to just share maybe 1 or 2 non-consensus predictions. What do you, Jensen, believe is going to happen to the industry in the next 5 to 10 years that very few other people agree about?
We don't agree about anything, so that's either a really easy question or an impossible question to answer, which is what I love about you, Matt. You ask really big and really small questions, and I think both are they're really important. The truth is somewhere in between those, and it's moving all the time, right? The reality of our own truth within that. So what I believe is going to happen, if the work that you and I and so many others are doing right now will happen, is that there is going to be a mass exodus from other industries into hospitality.
Wow.
I think about how when there was the tech boom, everybody wanted to be the Google of XYZ business. And I think we thought that meant you had bouncy chairs and foosball and snack bars with cool food and chefs. And so everyone kind of built that business. Turns out that was super tech bro and stuff anyway. And that culture has had to redefine itself as well. And we're struggling with that. One of the pieces of advice I've given to a lot of people in this industry, even though I'm really tripled down on trying to build something that my kids, with no pressure from me, might be able to be the 6th generation in our family to be of service to this industry, is how do you leave it better than you found it? And so the fact that I've given a lot of people the advice of, you should leave this industry, you should go. And they go, oh, this is all I know. And I have to spend time telling them how transferable their skills and their knowledge and their character really is. Because there's so much self-doubt. We're told you're only as good as your next plate up. Leave your shit at the door. Smile as part of your uniform. We're told those things, and we start to believe them, because so many of us come in this industry when we're 15, 16, 17 years old, like I did. Nobody becomes an investment banker at 17. So many of us come into this industry, right? And we stay, sometimes myself included, at that 17-year-old mindset. And so I've had to tell a lot of people to leave. And so when I think about the culture of the Google of XYZ industry, or, Apple doesn't sell phones, they sell technology and convenience, right? And cool. I think that hospitality has an opportunity, unlike any other industry, to be one of the most heralded industries because of the fact that we can create hospitality unlike any other industry. And when I see technology companies, when I see construction companies, when I see companies thinking about hospitality, how do I have hospitality for my employees? Because that's what a snack bar and foosball and a bouncy chair actually is. It's hospitality.
Amazing.
When they're thinking about hospitality and treating their customers, their clients in that way, that's the biggest opportunity. So if we build a good business model, if we, shake off the black eye of not a great place to work for this industry, you will see people leaving the receptionist job, the tech job, the electrician job, these different jobs that have probably pulled in a lot of hospitality professionals. We're going to see them say, wow, hospitality is something worthwhile. It's a true professional career. There can be the 65-year-old line cook who's getting ready to retire, who put 2.5 kids through school and has their version of the American dream, whatever that might be for them, because we invested in them and they were able to have longevity. They were able to be a part of an industry that is built to be equitable, profitable, and sustainable. That's the non-consensus, big pie in the sky dream that I have. That's the work that I'm trying to do. I know I won't accomplish it, but hey, maybe my kids will.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. Well, Jensen, this has been amazing. Just real quick, you could plug away where people can find you. What's the best place for us to follow along?
What am I liking right now? I'm liking the green screen videos. I'm doing the You Heard videos. So definitely check me out on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. You can check out at Jensen Cummings there every day, getting on and talking about a hungry article of exposing relationships between technology and nonprofit and lobbying, cool shit like that, to what's going on in, food entertainment. So I'm really liking the You Heard videos. The shows, you can go to Best Served Podcast on Facebook, and you can go to the website, bestservedpodcast.com. Check out, there's some great articles in there, a lot written by industry professionals, and we pay them $86 to write an article about their experience within the industry, if they're a dishwasher or a line cook or a bartender. So that's super fun. Restaurant Idea Factory, for sure, has got a lot going on, a lot of buzz around it. We're going to be coming out with a few more shows on the Best Served side, so look out for some ultra long form is happening. Film and entertainment is happening. Politics is going to be happening in that space. And then the last thing, if people are looking for any type of consulting or support, or even I love taking 14-minute phone calls with people just to inspire them, to light a fire under them, to tell them what the fuck are you thinking. So people can get at me directly. Jensen at bestservedcreative.com. I try and answer every single email, every single DM, every single text that I get. It's important for me to have rapid response and have some hospitality.
Awesome. Well, I'm very inspired by all your work. Thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge, and looking forward to following along and continuing to collaborate. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. And if you're curious to get a firsthand look at the cutting edge of food and tech, check out hungry.tv. That's Hungry with no U, where you can join in on live conversations like these or sign up for the free weekly newsletter.